So last week was fellowship.
Jesus Christ.
This week is forgiveness of salvation.
Hello and welcome to A God We Could Believe In, a frank and honest look at Christianity as we find it today. We're going to be looking at the things the church says and does that are embarrassing, confusing, or even downright offensive. In other religious contexts, your questions might be forbidden, but not here. So whether you're a lifelong churchgoer with the scars to prove it, or you've never entered a church and just interested in the debate, this is a safe space for you. In that spirit, we're diving headlong into questions of sex and relationships, covering topics from marriage and purity to sexuality and masturbation. We'll also be looking at issues of abuse, gender and identity, so listener discretion is advised. Please look after yourselves. In our first Q&A episode, we're reflecting on the episodes up to now and responding to some of the questions and feedback those episodes have generated. We'll also take some time to explore what the recent news of Bishop Sarah Mullally's appointment to the role of Archbishop of Canterbury means for a centuries-old patriarchal institution like the Church of England. I'm Tim Woodson, and once again I'm joined by practical theologian Simon Hall, biblical scholar Charlotte Naylor Davis, and poet, former social worker and daughter of Simon, Rachel Hall. Okay, so this is the first Q&A session on bad sex and the church, and we've had some great feedback from the first couple of episodes, so thank you very much for everyone who's listened so far. And we've had some other feedback as well, but we're going to just kind of gently cover as much of it as possible today. I guess, like, first off though, I want to find out from you all, how have you found it? Because we recorded some of these sessions quite a long time ago, so how have you found listening back?
I'll be honest, I feel quite exposed. I'm not ashamed of any of the things I've said. I'm really proud of the conversations we're having. But yeah, I was at a church the other day and someone came up to me and said, "Hello, Charlotte, we've never met. I listened to your podcast." And I was like, "Oh, you know a lot about me." That's really personal. And we've never met. I hadn't really fathomed that. But yeah, good. I'm proud of it. Obviously, listening to your own voice back's never great. But it is a bit weird that some people know some very intimate stories about me now, and I have never met them.
It is quite an introduction, isn't it? Going straight in on this is... I might not know anything about you, but I know your views on sexuality and church teaching. Yeah. How about you, Rachel? How have you found it?
I actually really enjoyed it once I managed to get past my bits. I think I was sort of going in it with a critical eye of like, have I said interesting things? And then I was like, actually, that's not the point. The point is that we're facilitating a good conversation. So I really, once I got past my own kind of ego of like, I want to sound intellectual and like I know what I'm talking about. And I think once I managed to get past that, I was like, actually, that's a really good conversation. I think particularly the second episode, because, you know, that was so long ago now. I was like, oh, I don't remember saying that, or like, you know, it was really nice to hear that conversation back.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and sometimes you're like, that was a good point.
Yeah. Well done me.
Well done me, yeah.
Is it worth letting people see behind the curtain and admitting that the first episode was recorded right at the end?
Yeah.
After we kind of got to know each other and much more comfortable with each other, which is why I must admit I found it even more cringy, the kind of extended joke / meditation on where God is during the sexual act, because I had kind of forgotten that, and I'd forgotten that was how the episode closed out as well. It was like, listeners, if you don't know me, you'll know that I'm like the king of the unintended double entendre, because I was literally just about to say, and what a climax that was.
Yeah, you need to rein yourself in, Simon.
Yeah, I popped that on Facebook earlier. As a
I saw that.
Without any context whatsoever.
Yeah, danger in this current media environment. But anyway, do you know what? I've had some really nice conversations with people about this. I've had, mostly my chats I've had with people have been people who have known me for years and have known this is a big thing about my life, but are not really like people of faith. But they're mostly like, oh, hey, it's like, you know, nice that you're doing this thing. And it's been really interesting hearing that development, you know, because they know and like me. So that's nice. And then I've had other ones from people who are in a similar state of mind, who are like, similarly unchurched who are also having a bit of a revision of all the stuff that they've experienced up to now, and have just said that this is stuff I've been thinking about and wasn't aware that other people were thinking about too. So really nice. So that's been really great. I've had nothing but validation, really. But has that been the case for all of you?
I would say yeah. I think luckily for me, the people that have chosen to reach out have been friends or kind of new acquaintances, and people that have shared it with their friends and then sent feedback back. And what I've heard is that people feel that what we're talking about is kind of needed and stuff that they've been thinking about for a long time, and feel that it's been well articulated and thought out. And it's been really nice to hear from, you know, strangers and people that I don't know that aren't just saying nice things because they are my friend and they like me. And I think one of the things I've enjoyed as well is the kind of feedback on, you know, the fact that Dad are having this conversation with each other.
Yeah, I can definitely say that my parenting has been validated. And other parents who look at me as if I'm doing some kind of amazing high wire act of like a father and a daughter talking about this stuff. And it's tempting to say, oh, yeah, we talk like this all the time, rather than we probably never would have had these conversations were it not for the fact of this podcast. But the reality was there is a little warm glow inside me that the reason we're talking about this stuff is in large part because Rachel said that she wanted to talk about it. So, like nearly all of the great things that I've done in my life, if I'd had any idea what was going to happen, I would never have embarked on it. But I think people are incredibly impressed, Rachel, with your ability to reflect on yourself as an embodied person, and how your disability and your study as a social worker has given you a kind of heightened awareness of some of the issues. So while I'm sure you came into this thinking, oh, well, I'm just any old person, I'm just another young person, what do I bring other than my questions? I think people have really seen that you actually bring a greater sort of depth of reflection than perhaps just another young person would bring.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think part of my fear as well is like I don't have a huge knowledge of theology. I don't, I couldn't talk about the Bible, for hours and hours and hours. And I think actually the lack of that can be quite intimidating. But I think a lot of people don't engage in these conversations or debates because they're in a similar situation. And I think it's been really useful for me to sort of go toe to toe with people that do have that knowledge and information and still go, actually, I want to ask the people that know far more about that aspect of it than I do, and also at the same time be able to acknowledge that my lived experience is valid in its own right.
Yeah, one of the pushbacks I got was the idea that sort of we should be restating church teaching, or really early in the series saying this is what is important from the theological standpoint. But I think what's been really valuable is listening to stories first before we come up with a new answer. And I think that's one of the things that's been missing in church in general, is that kind of listening and thinking, oh, this is real people's lives. It's not actually just a theological debate. And most theology isn't. Like, most theology hits the ground somewhere in somebody's messy human existence, and just restating the same things over and over again, even if that's the conclusion you come to at the end of this series, isn't the whole story. And so, I think having the four of us together, quite a lot of the good feedback I've had has been like, oh, the different perspectives in the room are really good, like different stories, different experiences.
Because I always imagined if I was to do a theology podcast, I would have imagined 5-10 years ago that it would have been very much dense, very much highly conceptual, very much all this kind of stuff. But the reason I'm here doing this, and the reason I've really appreciated the perspective that we're all coming from, is that unless that stuff has contact with air and actually kind of breathes on its own, what's the point? We can all sit and debate what's exactly happening at the point of the atonement, but at the end of the day, if what it leads to is people just feeling guilty or oppressed, or like they can't really live fully as themselves, then Like, what are we doing? What's the point of it? And I kind of think that to me is a litmus test for theology, is how much does it stand up to lived experience?
Or how much do we cope with when it doesn't? Because there's an element in which we might close our eyes, put our fingers in our ears and just go, la, 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 not, no, I don't want to know. An image that I often use is that theology is picture language. It's not a scientific description. It's a bit like the description of an atom that you get in your GCSEs of a football surrounded by little marbles. That's absolute nonsense, but it does actually work most of the time. And it's when it doesn't work that you find out what kind of scientist you are, whether you're really open to learning. And I feel like theology is the same. Many of us have gone for many, many years where everything works. That very simplistic picture works for us. And the real question is, what happens when you get outside that? And the simple answer, the very simple picture, doesn't work. And we're really trying to live in those spaces, which I guess is why we're not looking for a new answer. Yes, maybe there is a more complicated, postgraduate PhD description of an atom out there, but at the moment, at this point, we're just admitting to ourselves and each other that what we were told, simple and easy as it felt at the time, doesn't cover every base and doesn't cover every eventuality.
Because one of the criticisms that has been levelled, that we've noticed, I'm paraphrasing, but it was sort of a sort of implication that we're four people who sound like we've never read the Bible before.
I have never read it.
The funny thing is, Charlotte has just knocked herself out of the system by the extremity of her laughing. But she's coming back. But yes,
I'm back.
There is great irony in someone who has a PhD in translation studies. But we don't want to answer that question just yet, other than to say the idea of biblical marriage is one of those football surrounded by marbles ideas that covers a lot of things, but we're going to peel that away and look at the chaos underneath in the next episode.
That's it.
I think I'd like my answer to be that we all take all bits of this conversation very seriously.
Right.
And I think sometimes people think that because we haven't started with the Bible, or we didn't start with whatever their most important thing in theology is, we don't take it seriously. Or because we're laughing, we don't take it seriously. And none of that is the case, right? We're taking all of it seriously because we've all been embedded in church structures, church teaching. We've also all had varied experiences of sexuality, sexual trauma, sexual violence, things like that. When we're laughing, I mean, I laugh when I'm nervous, so I probably laugh more when I'm talking about a very serious topic than when I'm talking about something else. But like with the Bible, we have read it, we're taking it seriously, but it's only one part of this whole conversation, right? It's only one part of how God turns up in the world. So we'll get there and we'll reflect on it, but none of that's not preeminent to any of the other stuff, or it's just one of the bits,
Absolutely. Well, with that in mind, this is a Q&A episode. And we have, do you know what? There's been quite a lot of vicars coming out of the woodwork. And actually, before I jump into the Q&A question that we've had, I'm actually going to shout out to the Reverend John Swales, who shared a story of his listening experience. So he said he was heading into town today, listening to the Bad Sex episode on my Bluetooth headphones while wearing my vicar collar. All was going well. I found the episodes interesting, helpful, and challenging, except that I was also carrying a very large Bluetooth-enabled speaker. Yes, you guessed it. Suddenly the podcast switched from my headphones to the speaker, right at the point where you're discussing missionary/BDSM. It took me a moment to work out what had happened and fumble for the pause button. Needless to say, I turned bright red, shuffled quickly down the street, and tried to avoid eye contact with anyone around me. A fitting illustration, I suppose, of how awkward it can be to approach the topic of sex in church. So, I mean, if you're thinking of ways to share the podcast,
great way to do it.
That's one option. Some people go with a sort of private message kind of thing. That's also another option. But we'll leave you between those on the sliding scale of blasting it out into the street and sharing it privately with a friend. Then that's up to you. So, thanks, John. I hope you don't mind us sharing that one. And the question that we've had then is from another vicar, from Rob Denton, who asks, what's the best advice on sex you've heard or heard of from a church or minister? So there we go. Now, bearing in mind that there are a couple of you have professed to being ministers in this chat, I'll include your own teaching in that if you'd like.
Anything in this podcast is the best thing I've done on sex and marriage.
This is a classic preacher's roundabout way of answering that question. In that, I think there was a thing in The Guardian a few weeks ago, like the best sex advice ever, which works with 100% of women, was why not try asking them what they like?
That was it, yeah.
What?
Oh my God.
And I raised that. No, I mean, I don't want to reveal too much, but at some point in my life, I discovered a thing called the 5 Love Languages, which was written by a Christian minister, but it's trying to be universal in advice. I could probably deconstruct whether there really are 5 love languages and all of that kind of stuff, but just the principle of the way I give and receive love is probably different from the person that I am giving love to and receiving love from. And I would take that advice into the bedroom. And so just to be aware of the other person, their body, what they are doing for you and with you and to you, and think about listening to their body and encouraging them to listen to yours. So I've adapted that principle of the love languages as a general advice to, good sex.
Have you preached that in a church?
Not quite like that, no. I think I have made reference to it while teaching on the 5 love languages. I've done it the other way. I've talked about that principle of be aware of the other person and the thing that they're doing for you. Maybe you need to do that for them, and likewise.
Well, yeah. I mean, unless you've actually preached it doesn't count. So. Sorry, Simon. I mean, it's nice advice. It's nice advice. But
a passing joke at Chapel Allerton Baptist Church doesn't count.
Yeah.
Sadly.
I'm trying to remember any really good advice we got. I didn't do a marriage course before I got married, which I'm sure some people might say is why my marriage didn't last. I mean, it lasted 15 years, which is pretty good going, but yeah. I think it's telling that none of us can come up with anything amazing.
No. Well, we did do the marriage prep course.
Yeah.
Which was a wonderfully stilted HTB production, administered by couples in the church. So that it was nice. It's quite a nice setup. So you'd go there on a Saturday morning into the church centre, and they would play some videos for you. But you'd be set up on tables with your fiance, and they'd give you some glass of not wine, and you would watch a video in this kind of mock chat show style, and then you would get some discussion questions, and then watch another bit of video again. And it wasn't necessarily aimed at Christians. It was definitely a thing that they offered to everyone. It was a kind of general marriage advice. And I think it's like, I really appreciate the aims of that, because for a institution that takes marriage as seriously as the church, for them to want to go through that effort, I think that's a sign of them trying to deliver on what they believe. So, great, wonderful. One of the issues with it, though, is you get like hamstrung by some of the other things we've talked about. And, fine. The other advice I remember from a vicar, which is very practical, actually, and we did follow this, which was to, when you go and you're buying your first bed and duvet, to get a duvet the size up from your bed. Very practical.
I was given that advice too.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's great. I don't regret that, following that advice for 1 minute.
The sad thing is we could probably give all sorts of bad advice, but let's not depress ourselves and our listeners by doing that, unless they demand it. So if anyone out there really wants to hear the worst piece of advice that we've had, then we'll go there, but not today.
No.
I don't have any really great ones. Communication, I was told, was important. I mean, that's good. That's good advice. Well done.
Good.
Yeah. Great.
Rachel, have you had any thoughts on this one?
I don't think so. I don't think I've got any. I think just listening to, you guys talking, I can't think of a time where I had a positive conversation with, somebody older than me that was supposed to be a leader or, a guide or a mentor or whatever. I can't remember having a conversation where I left going, oh, I feel better having asked that question. And I remember talking, I know we said let's not do loads of negatives, but I remember talking to one youth leader, and I can't remember how or why we got to the conversation we were having, but we were talking about whether they had or hadn't had sex as a teenager, and they said that they had and regretted it. And now I'm like, I think you were made to regret it. Maybe you genuinely regretted it because of things that happened, but you grew up in a Christian context. You felt that you were supposed to regret that because you'd done something wrong. And, I don't remember having conversations even really about healthy relationships in a Christian context. So I think, all the advice that you guys have shared is my, first examples from church leaders, good, healthy advice on, being kind and generous and considerate, and doing this podcast is my first time having the experience of talking about these things in a positive way, which is part of the reason why I wanted to do it, because a lot of my experience up till now is the pain of it has been figuring it out on my own, because aside from my parents, there weren't church people that I felt that I could go to and say, well, I am doing this and I do think about that, and I would really love for you not to make me feel terrible about that and, make me feel guilty and kind of add to the shame that I've already got. So, unfortunately, I don't think I do have an example.
No. Well, I think that leads on quite nicely, though, to another bit of feedback we wanted to address, which was sort of people querying whether or not this is an elaborate exercise in us trying to justify our own sinful desires. And I think, obviously, there's only only one way you're meant to sort of take that.
Yes.
And I kind of think, this is kind of it, though, really, is we've tried it in various ways. All of us have tried doing what we've been told. And it just hasn't left us feeling that. If it's supposed to bring us closer to God, that hasn't succeeded. So, I just think on its own terms, that question is a problematic one. What do you guys think? Yeah,
I think it's not really a good faith question, I think, from the people who've asked it, but it's good to address it, right? And explain that we're people trying to figure out how we live in a way that centres Christ and doesn't require, well, for me anyway, doesn't require me to just leave everything behind when stuff doesn't work perfectly. And my life hasn't worked the way that I hoped. And so now I'm trying to figure out, how do I do that? And also, what do we have to offer? Or does the church have anything to offer? I've got friends who their kids are becoming teenagers and they want to know how they talk to their kids about this without just saying the same thing over and over again. Often a thing that didn't protect them when they were vulnerable. One of my friends is a mother and texted me and said, this was great because my kids are going to be teenagers soon. And, we weren't safe. We weren't made to be safe, to understand our bodies, to understand consent, to understand any of that. So I want to know how to talk to my kids. And you're like, this is... So it's not about justifying anything, really, because we're not going to lay down the law on what the new rule is. And also, I'm quite proud. We're having conversations that I wish I could have heard when I was a teenager. I wish I'd heard somebody just once talk about consent. Just once. It would have changed my life. So, again, not a justification for any behaviour, but just here's where we're at and here's the problems, and we need to be open about them and honest.
One of the things that I was thinking about as you were talking was kind of part of what we've discussed previously is children and young people being made to feel that their kind of natural bodily instincts are wrong. And, literally, I don't read loads of the Bible, but I'm pretty sure the first page of the Bible we're taught to, be fruitful and multiply. And, we find Adam and Eve and they're naked and they're shameless in their nakedness and their bodies are kind of beautiful and celebrated, and that imagery of them is a lovely picture. And part of me feels like we have almost taught ourselves to suppress these desires and feelings because of the way that we've interpreted something in the Bible. And, you know, we will talk about that, you know, at a later date. But I think about the power of, you know, this is naturally occurring. You know, I've talked about this before, but children as young as 3, 4, 5 masturbate. They don't know what they're doing, but they know that they are feeling pleasure. And this is something that naturally occurs in all of us. And to kind of label acknowledging kind of natural desires that we were made with, you know, we were made to procreate, to do this like wonderfully joyous thing, and to phrase that in a way of justifying desire as a negative thing, I think is part of the problem. And teaching people that their desires are wrong is part of the problem. And for me, it makes me think about, you know, I was born disabled. I don't have a traditionally working body in the way that able-bodied people do. And, you know, the question that I've wanted to ask my entire life is whether God did this to me on purpose. Was I made this way on purpose? And my naturally occurring body, particularly in the Christian community, has been made to feel wrong when people have been prayed for me to be healed. And they've talked about that language of, there is a better version of you that exists, and we're going to pray for that for you. And we do the same thing, I think, as I'm thinking about it now, we approach sexuality and that feeling of desire in the same way. There is a better, more purer, holier version of you that doesn't feel these feelings, even though we've been made this way. They are naturally occurring, and there is nothing wrong with those feelings.
Whew. Wow. I want to stick up for sin. We will
Go
be
sin!
We will be talking about sin within this podcast. I would stick up for the idea of sin. So
Okay,
the
good.
idea that we don't think that sin is a thing, that we don't believe that humans are cut off from God and each other and from nature and all of that. We do. Just a couple of things on that. First of all, Jesus said, it's not, you know, hate the sin, love the sinner, which lots and lots of Christians say. He said, hate your own sin and love everybody else. And when people say they want to hear about sin, it's always somebody else's sin that they want to hear being preached against. And so I don't know who asked that question, but it is worth just taking the time to say, why is this such a big deal for you? There are all kinds of comments about good and bad sex across the Bible, which we will be looking at in the next few weeks, but it's really not the most important thing by any means. So all of us in the church have got to ask ourselves what it is that makes us so obsessed with this thing and so forgiving of so many other things that the scriptures seem to be much more attentive to. So Jesus' advice is that we start with ourselves. So if you're a person that thinks that sexual sin is somehow much more important than anything else, you need to go to God and ask why you're so concerned with this and none of the other teachings of the scriptures.
There you go. Wow, we're laying it down today. I'd say one of the things I've been reflecting on doing this thing, and it's difficult recording these sessions because we've recorded the main episodes in advance and then we're coming and doing these Q&A ones after. So it's difficult to not prefigure everything that we're about to talk about over the next few months. We've scheduled them in. But with that in mind, I've really appreciated being on this journey from a point of view of this is all stuff that having a framework to work through some of these questions that I've been sat with for years, things that I felt awkward about or felt like I have to toe a line about and that have created a real conflict in me. Being able to just talk about them honestly for what they are because they exist. Whether you want them to or not, these questions exist. We have to talk about them. So being able to talk about them, and then it's only now that I feel like ready to talk about where we are going to kind of end up. I know that there are lots of people who are like, great, well, what should we be doing instead? And we will get to that, but we're not going to pretend that we're going to have any definite answers on that, but we will hopefully point to perhaps a route forward if you're the kind of person who takes the Bible and God and Jesus seriously, but also takes these concerns seriously too. We hopefully will have an answer to that coming up in April.
I think it's important to go on the journey, though, isn't it? That's the thing, right? Like, we've all come from positions where we were told a rule and then tried to figure it out afterwards, and actually come with us on the journey. Like, I really want to encourage people to take the time and come with us as we do the Bible bit next, and a bit on marriage, and a bit on, like, we're kind of really getting down into the kind of mud of it. So come with us and do that, and take the time. You don't have to have an answer today. It's okay. Like, if the worry is, well, what does God say I need to know? I think God's bigger, and it's okay. It's okay to just be in a little bit of tension and not knowing for a bit. It's a very healthy spiritual place to be.
With all that in mind, I'd also like to just spend a bit of time considering some news recently. Just a couple of weeks ago, there was an announcement that Sarah Mullally is going to be the next Archbishop of Canterbury. And the next couple of episodes, we're devoting in various ways to the idea of patriarchy. And I think this case study serves as an excellent example of how this works in practice on an institutional level, and how in a sort of inherited patriarchal structure is wrestling with modern times. So for those who are not overly concerned with the inner workings of the Church of England, does someone want to give a bit of a pot history on, well, what's so significant about this appointment?
I was not prepared for this. Which means I don't have dates, but I was definitely an adult.
There's not going to be a quiz. It's fine, Simon.
I was definitely an adult when women were permitted to be ordained in the Church of England. The Church of England is a very broad church, and it has a kind of squishy middle, but at its extremities, there are different groups of people who feel very, very strongly for different reasons that women cannot be leaders. On one side, you've got your Anglo-Catholics who believe in an apostolic succession of men from St. Peter. And on the other side, you've got your evangelicals who, because Paul said, I don't permit a woman to teach, that's it forever. And they really don't like each other in everything else, but on this one issue, they become brothers in arms.
Brothers being the optimal word.
Exactly. to fight the feminazis.
That's us.
And so it's taken a very, very long time. I don't want to big up any other denominations because they've all kind of trailed behind political moves for women's equality and emancipation. But it has taken the Church of England a very long time. But so in galactic terms, it's an amazingly short period of time from women being allowed to be ordained to one being the leader of one of the largest denominations in the world. Because we obviously have the Church of England, but because of colonialism, we have branches all over the former empire and other parts of the world as well. So it's a really big deal. It would be fair to say that the rest of the world has not taken this universally well. Lots of places are still fairly divided when it comes to gender. There are little outposts like South Africa. People might be aware of Desmond Tutu and his amazing ministry, which means that the Anglican Church in South Africa is a bit more open and inclusive and welcoming of diversity, but by and large it's been received incredibly badly. So whoever made this decision has been very brave, because it certainly kicked up a lot of dust. I hate to say this, but I think one negative reason is that it will have been quite hard to find a senior Anglican clergy person who is not tainted by complicity in sexual abuse. And even Sarah Mullally has had some stuff thrown at her in the last few days from survivors of sexual abuse in the church. But by and large, she was the chief nursing officer. She knows her procedures. I think one hopeful thing about her, beyond just the symbolic fact of her being a woman, is that I think she's going to get the Church of England's house in order with regard to safeguarding.
Let's hope so.
We can only hope, yeah.
It's one of those strange things because neither Simon and I are Anglicans, so that taints my idea of kind of this position. But it's certainly an incredible move from the Anglican Communion to appoint a woman. As in just inside Britain, there are still Anglican ministers and bishops who don't want there to be women in leadership. And up until now, they've had a kind of slightly kind of a weird little group that you can be part of where you don't have to take any orders from a woman bishop. I'm not quite sure what's going to happen there. I think this is where hierarchy becomes really interesting, because if you believe in the hierarchy, then she's been duly appointed and you should probably fall in line. So there's an interesting thing going on with the clash of different ideologies. It was interesting that a lot of my non-Christian friends texted me to tell me about it and go, this must be great. So from the outside, people are doing two things. They were saying two things to me. One was, this is great, isn't it? Look at this. There's finally a woman at the top of the church. They see that as important because the church and the state are linked in Britain. So actually, it is important that we have equal and proportional representation in that kind of space. And then other people were saying, but then I was listening to it on the radio and they had some guy on and going on about how women can't have power, and didn't he sound stupid? Like, do the church realise what they sound like to the outside world? You know, because for some people, the idea that this is exciting is rather than late when you're not inside these conversations they're just like, this is completely mad. What do you mean there hasn't been a woman at the top of the church ever? You know, and I think it's important to see sometimes how different the church is from other that there is a culture inside. It is a subculture. It has its own rules, and that has a lot of power. And it's not just that we happen to have a belief in Jesus. Actually, we live in a culture, and that culture has different rules, and those rules affect us in lots of different ways. And let's say my non-Christian friends' response kind of shows that, I think.
So for people who are not aware of what the kind of resistance is to women in the church, where does that come from?
It comes from two places. There's partly just traditional patriarchy in the church, 1,000 years or so. The place of women in established kind of in Catholicism and then established into the Church of England has been as those who cannot minister. And really that embeds itself in the Middle Ages. There are times in the history, I'm an advocate for the fact that there are, in the early church, women all over the place doing things, and that Paul refers to women as apostles and deacons, and they're in our texts. However, patriarchy is as patriarchy does. they get edited out. There are times in the Middle Ages where women have lots of power because they can be abbesses of abbeys. So we think of Hilda at Whitby, people like Hildegard of Bingen, Julian of Norwich. But once the church in the Protestant Reformation becomes this kind of established smaller thing, in the Anglican Church they keep hold of that idea that women, because the Bible has various verses about gender hierarchies, which I think we do talk about in some episodes, that women can't be those who have leadership over a man. They can't have authority over a man. So they can have authority in different ways, but not over a man. And dissenting churches do away with that different times, but the Anglican Church has kept it up until the 90s. That women can't be priests.
Because what I was saying earlier about these things have to have survive contact with air. I think this is a perfect example. So I grew up in a church in the 90s that was led by a woman. Anglican church led by a woman. So obviously that set the context for me. It's like, of course women can be leaders. Here is one leading. And so that set a very early tone for me of of any of this stuff just seems insane. And I've never met anyone who holds that position who isn't holding it as some sort of contortion. They're not also having to juggle these other things of yes, but my colleague is one of these, or I'm a woman and I'm in a position of leadership, but I shouldn't really believe it, all of these things just seem demonstrably ridiculous. So I hold my hands up alongside the people outside the church who are like, what's this about? Why is this a thing in 2025? Why is this a thing?
Yeah. I mean, even so, the thing that always made me laugh was that when women became able to be priests in the late 1990s, if you watch The Vicar of Dibley, all of the stuff that is said in that first episode is stuff that was in the news that literal ministers were saying. It was real quotes. They just took them out of... Yeah. But Anne Widdecombe, who was an MP and happy to have power in government in Britain, defected from the Anglican Church to the Catholic Church over the idea of women priests. So people they hold these two categories, and like you say, if you have a much more kind of joined up way of thinking, that probably if a woman can be your doctor and your lawyer and, you know, can govern the country, maybe a woman can be trusted to make spiritual decisions.
Yeah.
It seems odd to hold that out, but it's part of the exceptionalism of theology, I think, and kind of spiritual lives, and a sort of separation between what's spiritual and what is the rest of the world that I don't really adhere to, right? I don't think they're that separated. But yeah, people separate it off into a kind of like, yes, but in Christian world, women are like entirely different beasts. Like, just like we're a completely different entity once we walk into a church.
One thing I want to raise, and I'm sure we will come back to this over and over and over again, is that there are words applied to Christians and other kinds of people, especially politicians, that they are either conservative or progressive. And often those words are vastly ill-advised. Margaret Thatcher was not a conservative in any way. She was a radical revolutionary who happened to work for a party called the Conservative Party. But I think there are some people who feel that the basic tenor of Christianity is conservative, in the sense that we have this great tradition that comes down to us from thousands of years, and changing anything is inherently losing something. And we have another group of people who feel like the past is a place of darkness and change is inherently an improvement on things. And I think both are wrong.
Right.
I think changing things is not always changing things for the better. You know, we have to ask about the impact of technology on our lives and the massive rise of mental illness among young people, which coincides with the onslaught of social media and handheld devices. Change is not always a good thing, but conserving things is not always a good thing. And I think the folk who are trying to hold on to the idea of male-only leadership are generally people who, for temperamental reasons, feel that change is always bad. And the theology comes after that. They're just uncomfortable. If we've done it like this way for 2,000 years, surely that must make it the right way to do things. And if we're just changing it because everyone else thinks we're stupid, then it becomes a hill that I'm willing to die on, and sometimes a hill I'm willing to kill on, because this change is bound to be bad.
I mean, lots of people have had women in ministry for a long time. I think it's important to say there are theologies that embrace women ministers and leaders for hundreds of years, and I would say nearly 2,000. And again, politics matters. I wish that weren't the case. I think I mentioned it in the last episode, but like, we like to pretend that spiritual matters are always just spiritual, and particularly if we're holding a very firm line on something, that this is just about what God says. It's not about anything else. It's just about what God says. But it isn't. It's always embedded in other political discussions, and a female Archbishop of Canterbury is an incredibly bold political move. One that I think is good. It will be interesting to see how she works with the Catholic Church, because the Archbishop of Canterbury and the Pope have always had communication and worked together quite a lot, and this will be an interesting kind of thing to see how that works, because obviously there is now a gender barrier to get over. So
thanks so much for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, then please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcasts to make sure you don't miss an episode. Episodes are released every other Monday, and our next episode, the uncontroversially titled Marriage in the Bible is a Bin Fire, will be available on Monday 27th of October. Here, our resident biblical scholar, Dr. Charlotte Naylor-Davis, will take us on a whistle-stop tour through the Bible as we go hunting for the mythical model of a good Christian marriage. The Q&A will then follow on Monday 10th of November. We're sure you'll have lots of questions for Charlotte after this one, so please message us at agodwecouldbelievin@gmail.com or via our socials. Make sure you get your questions to us by Friday 7th of November to feature. Lastly, a reminder, if you'd like to support the project, please make sure you share it with your friends, family, pets, etc. And you can patronise us by subscribing at agodwecouldbelievin.substack.com. Here you'll also receive bonus episodes and regular reflections from Simon and the team right to your inbox. We'll see you again very soon.